Hey there, welcome to yet another episode of Strange Planet. Glad you're aboard. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. The famous Roswell incident is, in the perspective of many, the origin of what we have come to know as the UFO phenomenon in recent times. The UAP threat. Roswell was indeed a major turning point in terms of public awareness as well as government involvement, at least in the USA, but it didn't start at Roswell. The public view of UFOs beginning in 1947 is merely a continuation of long-standing phenomenological patterns. An abundance of historical UFO sightings exist from long before Roswell, working back through the centuries into antiquity and beyond, citing 364 separate cases. My guest tonight and her co-author show that anomalous phenomena is as enduring through the ages, more witnessed and reported or more discussed and debated than the UFO phenomenon. My guest is the co-author Barbara DeLong. Describes herself as a free spirit. She's a spiritual empath. She is the host of a radio program called NightLight, and she is the co-author of a brand new book called Before Roswell, The Secret History of UFOs, along with Ken Goudsward, who was on the program recently. Barbara DeLong, welcome. How are you?
I am terrific. Thanks so much for having me on.
So let's start with my understanding is that you cracked open your late husband's UFO files, and and that kind of formed, I guess, the basis of this book. Tell me about your late husband, Patrick Cook.
Well, Patrick was well known in the UFO community. As a matter of fact, his website, the Bible UFO Connection, was probably one of the biggest and first ones out there. He was burned in effigy in many different places. So he felt that, he had definitely hit the peak of his career. Um, and even, many people like Giorgio and a lot of the other people out there have used his material to sort of base a lot of their things on. He died over 10 years ago, and I became the caretaker of his work. And when I realized I couldn't keep his website and my website up at the same time, I made sure that everything that had been on his website was either in one of his 3 books, or I took it and I put it onto my website. And there were only 2 areas that I transferred over. One was the UFO, and the other was the material on giants. And I've had a UFO experience, so it felt like I could certainly honor his material, and it's been on my website for the last 10 years. I certainly have been through it myself, but when Ken got a hold of me and we started looking at it, it was a little antiquated. It hadn't been added to in 10 years. So Ken added stuff and I added stuff, and I'm sure Patrick will, would be pleased. If he's not, then he can tell me it's fine with me. But it was an exciting adventure when Ken said, let's do something with it. So I decided to, dig into it. And certainly I've read through the material often, but never to a point of having to speak with great authority on it. So I will do my very best. Most of the articles are, the more I read through it, the more fascinated I become with the articles that have been out there, and there's still more probably that we could add. At least there's one that, if you have time, I'd like to sort of throw in there, and those are the Dropa stones in China.
Let me just jump in because you mentioned Giorgio Tsoukalos because Patrick was very early on a part of Ancient Aliens, and so people will know.
With that crowd, yes.
Yes, he will be known to fans of Ancient Aliens. All right, so you mentioned your UFO experience. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. It's really now a pleasure to talk about it. I have been accused of being drunk in college so many times now that it's not funny, but I was in college. It was 66, and that was when the UFO sightings were rampant all over the place, and J. Allen Hynek was going all over the place, calling everything swamp gas. But in '66, there was an event that happened on my campus that has been authenticated as an actual sighting. They locked the doors of the girls' dorms at 11 o'clock, which nobody ever understood that, because we certainly could get in trouble well before 11 o'clock. But the doors were locked, and between my dorm and the baseball field, there was a large building. And at about, I guess it was a few minutes to 11 o'clock, we had radios on. Those days you didn't have a TV. There was one in the dorm, but mostly we listened to the radio. And there was a news flash, and they said that a UFO had been sighted near Eastern Michigan's campus, and that they had stopped the air traffic to all 3 of the airports in the area. And so at that point, we started to hear sirens, and we looked out the windows, and indeed there were police cars rushing past us with sirens blaring and lights flashing, just the right way to approach a UFO. And we could hear on the radios them saying, we're going to turn the stadium lights on to get a better view. And we could see the glow in the sky as the stadium lights went on, at which point we saw a saucer slowly rise up, and it swooped over my dorm, so that for a brief moment in time, all we could see when we looked up was this saucer. I've frequently said if it had had a VIN number, I probably could have read it. It was only a couple hundred feet above us, and it hovered there, which it felt like forever, but it wasn't. And then suddenly went, and it was gone. There was no noise, no air displacement, no breaking the sound barrier. People around me were screaming, were running, were hiding under beds and in closets, which I never understood. And there were a few of us that actually saw it, and yet 2 of the people standing right next to me didn't see a thing. And it kind of reminded me of, in retrospect, of Close Encounters of a Third Kind, where at the very end they're shoving, can't remember who the actor was, but they're shoving him in line to go along with the other travelers into the UFO, and people were saying he hasn't been trained. And somebody said, but he was invited. And that's what I felt like. It was sort of like I wasn't invited to go along, but I was invited to understand, and invited to not be frightened, and invited to follow my curiosity.
This was the University of Michigan.
Eastern Michigan.
Eastern Michigan. And this case, the Air Force sent Dr. J. Allen Hynek to investigate, right?
He did. And he said it was swamp gas. It's only in retrospect that it was credited with being one of the authenticated sightings. And so we waited breathlessly from midnight to hear the news of what it had been. And there was nothing on the news, absolutely nothing. So we would look out the windows and see that our campus was being patrolled by pairs of policemen with dogs. And the next day, nothing. I was student teaching at the time, and the woman I was student teaching with, her husband was in the Air Force, and she said she knew nothing of it. It was amazing. I called my mother and before they would put the call through, those were days when you had to place person-to-person calls, and she talked to a friend of hers who happened to be the publisher of the local newspaper. So my report was in the local newspaper, but that's the only place I knew of for many, many years. And apparently there were other reports of it, but I never saw any of them. And of course, between then and about 14 years ago, I have been teased mercifully by everyone, like, you say you don't drink. Well, this is the best story we've ever heard. And when somebody published a book called In Focus, which was about authenticated UFOs, my sighting was in there, and I immediately bought 15 of the books and gave them to everybody I knew that had teased me with, "Ha, see, it really did happen." So it was exciting. It was, it was almost like coming to the opening of something, because I really think in many ways it set me on the pathway I'm on today.
How could it not? How could it not? I mean, 1966, I believe, was also the year there was another. Preston Dennett has written an entire volume just dedicated to UFOs on school and college campuses, and your UFO incident was in the book, certainly, and also 1966 there was Westall College in Australia as well. So yeah, the UFOs definitely have a keen interest in revealing themselves to primary school students, high school students, college students. Let's get back to sort of the premise of the book, Before Roswell, The Secret History of UFOs, the idea that, it didn't begin and end with 1947 and Roswell. Although Roswell, 1947, there was just a complete hysteria with regards to UFOs, beginning prior to Roswell with the Kenneth Arnold sightings,
Mhm.
After Roswell. But you point out in the book something like 13,000 years we can go back.
Oh, at least.
13,000 years ago with recorded UFO sightings beginning in France, right? Let's talk about that.
Well, those are the caves in France that have the pictographs of, and it's an actual UFO. And I think I sent you a tremendous list of you asked for a few talking points. I sent you 14 pages. But at 45,000 BC, China has rock carvings of a UFO. So it goes back that far. And they've been with us forever. I think frankly, I think they may have been cruising the planet before humanity came here.
Amazing. 33 sightings have been documented. That's it? 33? Now, when we say documented, because obviously there have been, I don't know, tens of thousands, maybe more, reported UFO sightings. If we go to, for example, the National UFO Reporting Center and Peter Davenport's work. But when you say 33 sightings have been documented, what does that mean?
It means that there were reports of them, that they were in newspapers, or they were something that newspapers had put out there. 30 during 47, there were 33 that we could find. It doesn't mean that's all there were. And to be honest, I think both Ken and I accepted the foundation that Patrick had given us. We added several that we thought were really important, like Operation High Jump, which came after. No, it was before Roswell, and so it's there were things that have come out now, and it's been something that the government just hasn't been honest about and open about. And it's too bad, because I think we probably would be in a better place had we put it out there so everybody knew about it. And it's to this point in time, people see a UFO and they say, "Oh, that's a UFO." And in reality, anything you can't explain is a UFO. It doesn't mean there are little green men in it. It just means you don't know what it is. But there have been saucers, and there have been lights in the sky and orbs and all sorts of things that do allude to the fact that there is another intelligence that is watching us, and they're not waiting till we get fat enough to eat. They certainly, if they were going to take over the planet and re-terraform it, they could have done it over many thousands of years and haven't. My personal belief system is they're watching us till a level of consciousness we have arisen to, so that we have at least peace on the planet. And once the planet is a peaceful planet, then I do believe we may be invited into another level of consciousness exploring the universe. But until then, I think we're much too barbaric.
I have to ask you, because I've missed the anniversary, and I had people emailing me and texting me and so forth. Oh, you have to talk about, because it was, I think, February 24th. So we just passed the, what is that, 84 years ago, the anniversary of the battle over Los Angeles.
Oh, yes.
So I know I'm late on the anniversary and people want to hear about it, but let's talk about the Battle of Los Angeles, which, you know, obviously after Pearl Harbor, which had occurred just 3 months earlier, the United States was on very high alert, expecting some kind of an attack from Imperial Japan. In fact, they did, when we had that recent incursion of spy balloons from China, or a spy balloon, the others we don't know yet what they were. But that was very reminiscent of what Japan did during the Second World War. They sent huge balloons over the West Coast. They had detonation devices. There were people actually killed. I think in Oregon, one of these landed and exploded and killed a family that were out picnicking. Anyway, so the Battle of Los Angeles, February 1942, kind of set the scene and tell us what happened.
Well, they detected airplanes, they thought, coming from the ocean, assuming that they were Japanese. They called an all-out blackout. Sirens were blaring all over the place. I think actually I can give you a second-hand explanation of it, because before Patrick passed away, we had a man who was a child at that time living in Los Angeles, and he witnessed the whole thing. And he said that he was fascinating. He said that instead of people hiding and looking for shelter, they were out in the streets watching these lights as they came overhead. And there were spotlights. They lit up spotlights, and they shone them at least one of them, at least the one that he talked about. And he was fascinated with the fact that our batteries on the beaches were firing at it, but they were exploding before they actually hit the target. So that there must have been some sort of a shield that was protecting this object. It moved very slowly. It wasn't, it didn't zip by. And I don't know if there were more than one. Some people say there were, and some people say there weren't. So, but he saw one particular that was fascinating to him. And he saw shrapnel falling. And the shrapnel was from our armaments that were bouncing off of this particular object. There were actually casualties because of it, but it was because of our armaments falling on them and killing people. Not so much that they weren't shooting back. There were planes in the air that were shooting at them, and the next day, all of the kids went to the beach, and he was one of them, and they were paid for any shrapnel they picked up. The Army wanted to make sure that they preserved all of it. And he said he made a nice bit of money considering his age and the time, but they never got where they came from. They left as peacefully and quietly as they came, and it was a long time before people realized that this wasn't Japanese and it wasn't ours. And then again, the question, who was it? And it was large enough so that they had planes going against it and everything, so that it obviously, I don't recall him saying how large it was, but if airplanes were shooting at it and the bombs were bouncing off a shield, it must have been large enough to hold a great many people or occupants.
Yes, indeed. Occupants. All right, let's take a time out, Barbara. Before Roswell, the Secret History of UFOs. Back with more of our conversation right after these. Every new season, we find a reason to improve our lives and our health. And C60 Evo organic edible oils deliver noticeable benefits quickly. A spoonful in the morning delivers energy and endurance all day long. And I sleep deeper and wake up feeling refreshed because C60 ESS60 works. Carbon-60 received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1996 when it was used for industrial applications. C60 EVO's ESS60 is a breakthrough technology upgrading C60 to be safe for human and pet consumption. ESS60 has been called a miracle molecule because of the physical and mental benefits people are enjoying. Their lab has a proven track record of 31 years and thousands of happy customers across the world, just like me. So, treat yourself, your friends, and your family to C60 EVO and use my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Again, my link, EVRS, to get 10% off your first order. Barbara DeLong is with us, and she has co-authored a book along with Ken Goudsward. The book is Before Roswell, The Secret History of UFOs, with some assistance from her late husband, Patrick Cook, who will be familiar with all of you Ancient Alien fans. He was certainly a big part of that program early on. Let's talk about prior to 1942. People tend to think, UFO sightings, they only seem to happen in the United States. Why is that? Not true. I mean, we talked about the cave paintings in France, but I mean, where do we even dive in? Let's go all the way back to early turn of the century. Let's see, where do we go? How about Arola, Switzerland, 1896, and look who it is, Aleister Crowley.
Yes. It's fascinating. He actually was on a mountain trip, and he met a person who he, said hello to or whatever, and they didn't respond to him. But he's not the only one. I think what fascinated me is every time I read through, I catch something new. Aleister Crowley saw one or two times. Nicholas Roerich, who was a very famous artist artist. He's my favorite artist. He apparently had 2 sightings when he was in the Himalayas, and it's almost as though just about everybody had one. Haley, the Haley comic guy, he had 2 instances where he saw UFOs, and he recorded them. You almost stumble over people. Christopher Columbus, and that was a unidentified C1. It came out of the water.
Right.
And he and one of his shipmates saw it, and he recorded it in his diaries. I just, it blew my mind, the numbers of people that have seen them and recorded them. And I think it took somebody like Patrick or similar to gather all of this together to show, exactly, how many there are and how often they occurred and how frequently they were written down, and people, while they may have been in the newspaper, it was just a casual thing. And, and then, there were 50 cows that got loose in Farmer Brown's field, but I think the most fun, the one that I am, the piece of trivia that I will hold forever in my heart, is that the first pilot to actually shoot down a UFO.
Do tell.
Was the Red Baron in Germany.
Oh, get out of town. I didn't know that.
He was the very first one to shoot one down. It crash landed, and the pilot survived, got out and ran into the woods and was never heard from again. But that is the very first time in history that I have found that a UFO was shot down by a pilot.
I had no idea.
Isn't that a cool piece of trivia?
That might be the coolest piece of trivia I have heard in a very, very long time. Let's stick with World War I.
Okay.
Gallipoli, Turkey. British Army Regiment, 1st, 4th Norfolk.
Oh, those 800 men.
They disappeared.
Was that it? Yeah, the 800 men that marched into the fog and never returned?
Yes.
I couldn't believe that either. The whole The whole platoon, 800 of them marched into this strange fog, and the fog lifted and they were gone. And at the end of the war, they asked for the return of the prisoners, and they didn't know what anybody was talking about. Never heard from again.
So no trace of the regiment has ever been found. 800 of them. They were trying to take something called Hill 60. Again, this is in Gallipoli, Turkey, a very famous battle during World War I. And, I mean, this was done. I mean, there were witnesses that reported back, right? There was something like 22 witnesses who said, no, we saw 800 of them march into the fog, and that's it, never came back.
And the other part that was fascinating was there was no sound of conflict. There was no sound of, battle of any sort. They just marched into the fog as though they were going to lunch, and fog lifted and they were gone as well.
So, I mean, that could have been a UFO. It could have been a time slip.
It could have been a lot of things, but to me, it was interdimensional. It was almost as though a portal was opening up and they marched into the portal.
Right.
And when the fog cleared, the portal was gone, and so were they. I can't imagine that 800 spirits were killed. I would imagine that they went somewhere, whether it's another dimension or what, because there are a couple of places like that. The Bosnian pyramids. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Dr. Sam. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'll just stick with Sam. He's been on the show a number of times, and in the tunnels that he has been excavating, they found a number of stones that they were ceramic, and when they moved them and came back the next day, the tunnels were flooded, so they moved them back. On one of the rocks, one of these ceramic rocks, there were what appeared to be glyphs. They weren't hieroglyphs, but they were glyphs. And when they were interpreted finally, it basically said that we've closed the tunnels, and we will remain here, and we will defend this place until the Stargate opens.
The Stargate. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I had to remind myself, it's because years ago I had Dr. Sam Osmanagich.
Yeah.
He's still with us? He's still around?
He's still around. I've had him on the show a number of times, and he's one of my most favorite interviews, because I prepped for his show like you wouldn't believe. I introduced him. He said, "Thank you." And I asked him one question, and for 2 straight hours, he interviewed himself. And Barbara, you would ask, and this is why. And he just, I could have baked cookies, folded laundry, and taken a bath. It was, I had to interrupt him and end the show.
Yeah, it's been years since I've had him on. I'll have to get him back on. Thank you for reminding me about him. Let's talk about, well, let me ask you, because you mentioned interdimensionals. Is that what you think we're dealing with here, interdimensionals versus extraterrestrials?
If it weren't for the Rendlesham Forest event, I might have said yeah. I had on Jim Peniston, the guy that touched the
downloads of ones and zeros. Yeah.
Yeah, it was he was downloaded with the binary code. It was a number of years later that he showed it to Linda Moten Howe, and they interpreted it. And basically, it said the human condition. Basically, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, but basically, it said it gave the latitude and longitude of a lot of the sacred sites that are around the country. But it also said basically the human condition worth continuing observing. Date of origin 8100. So, and at first I thought, isn't that great? We're still around, in 8100. And then it occurred to me that wasn't necessarily from humans. but it was somebody who knew how to use binary code. So I'm not sure who is reviewing us in 8100 and sending something through time, but that certainly is an occurrence where the drone was here to gather information and it managed to gather it and then go back to wherever it originated from.
The time travel hypothesis, perhaps.
Yeah.
They are us.
Well, are they? Or are they another consciousness that is able to communicate with binary code?
Your guess as good as mine.
Well, it's interesting because in some of the crop circles, there was the crop circle was a representation of a gray, and then there was a circle with binary code in it. And I'm not sure what it said, but I do know that some of the things that we have sent out into space that had information on us and where we are and what we look like and all of that have been replicated in crop circles, but with a different origin and a different shape of person, so that it's sort of like maybe we've sent something somewhere where it was understood, and isn't it wonderful? Or we have just put where we live out to the universe, and anybody can come and get us and take the planet. So it's could be one or the other.
All right, Barbara, we are going to slip away here just for a moment, and we'll come back and continue to talk about UFOs before Roswell, the secret history. Back with more in a moment. November reminds us to be thankful and focused on boosting our radiant health before winter. And I use a potent remedy that's improved the quality of my life and deepened my sleep as well. I take C60 Evo olive oil every morning, and I have a lot more energy and mental focus all day long. My workouts are easier, and I have a lot more endurance. If you're into competitive sports, this is a game changer. Health is our greatest wealth, and Pura C60 ESS60 really works. ESS60 is a breakthrough technology delivering the carbon-60 miracle molecule for humans and pets. Check out the C60 Evo holiday gift collections for everyone on your list. They make amazing skin, lip, and hair repair serum that deliver noticeable results quickly. C60 Evo's lab has an impressive track record of 31 years and, of course, my personal recommendation. You deserve the best remedies on Earth, and so do those you love. Buy direct from the lab and upgrade your life today. Use my code EVRS to save 10% off your first order. Again, my code EVRS and save 10% off your first order. And we are back with Barbara DeLong. And the book is Before Roswell, The Secret History of UFOs, co-authored by Ken Goudsward, who's been recently on the podcast talking about the Fermi paradox. That was a great conversation. Tell us about the program, NightLight Radio, because we have a mutual colleague, friend, Mark Eddy, who's heard on the program quite frequently. Tell me about what it's about, how we can listen, and so forth.
NightLight Radio is on Blog Talk Radio, and it also then goes up onto YouTube so that it is carried all over the place. That's YouTube is probably the best way to find us. I started it 14 years ago, and I started it with the intention of it being a light in the darkness for people who were searching. And it's been an interesting evolution over 5 years. Well, I've known Mark for a very long time, and he's been on a number of different radio shows. And when he last became available about 5 years ago, I said, stop jumping around show to show to show. I'll give you a show. Come over to NightLight. I'll give you a show. You can, within reason, do anything you want. I had to say within reason because he can be strange sometimes. And he came over, and I said, I'll do all the techie work. I'll do everything. You just turn up with your guest, and we'll have it whenever you want to. And I said, but I will absolutely, with no shame, pump you for every resource you've got. And he's been charming, and he's connected me with tons of wonderful people. and has been a pleasure to work with. He's the one that has taken on the chore of finding places for me to talk about the book. And I finally, both Ken and I had to say, cease and desist. We do have lives.
He's persistent.
Yeah, oh my gosh. But he's been a great partner in crime. And I thoroughly have enjoyed having him have his show on NightLight Radio. A number of other people have shows that are broadcast off of NightLight. It's gotten a lot bigger than I anticipated ever. And it's been very exciting.
Yeah, Mark is an interesting character. He has turned me on to so many different people, guests that have been on this podcast, that were on my former late night syndicated radio program, and then some of them have gone on to join me on Coast to Coast. So back to Before Roswell. Before we had, bright lights in the sky, or cigar-shaped discs, or flying discs, there was a period, late 19th, early 20th century, when there were thousands of reports, not just in the United States, but across Europe. And what they were describing were, well, they looked like blimps, or what we call dirigibles. Tell me about those.
Yeah, 1887, 89, in that time frame, I think. Yeah, it's a fascinating time. The reports are just, they blew me away, because when I started reading through them, I said, well, these aren't flying saucers, but they are unidentified flying objects. And the most exciting part of it all was, bless you,
Thank you.
was 88, 89. And in that time frame, they were blimps. It sounds like they were blimps, but dirigibles weren't really used. They weren't out there that much. Or 1910 is about when the dirigibles really became a part of our culture. And what fascinates me is that in several cases, they would throw an anchor over the side that would get caught on something, and someone would have to climb down from the airship to unfeather it. And in a couple cases, whoever climbed down suffocated. I mean, it's what the newspaper article said, suffocated in the atmosphere. There were a couple of other places where people came down and were speaking in a language that was not English, and so they weren't understood. And then there were others in which they offered people a ride. So I don't really understand I mean, there were also UFOs, but the dirigibles were in that time frame, and it was fascinating. I think the one that fascinated me the most was in Aurora, Kansas, Aurora, Texas.
Switzerland.
Texas.
Oh, Aurora, yes, because there's Aurora, Switzerland, but there's Aurora, Texas, yes.
And it flew into a windmill and took it down. And they tried to fix it, and it wasn't fixable, but they tried to take off again, and it crashed. And there were, they thought originally that there were 5 inhabitants, but they only found one body when it crashed and burned. And the people of the community gathered up the body, and they had a funeral for it. It was a very little person, and they had a funeral for this passenger or whatever. And he was buried in the local cemetery, but without a headstone. And the UFO people, many years later, decades later, wanted to dig him up, and the people in Aurora would not tell them where the grave was. They felt that the inhabitant should rest in peace.
It's a great chapter in UFO history.
Oh yeah.
I have a particular interest in this next one because my late father, who was a Second World War veteran, he was in an armored regiment out of Winnipeg, which was called Fort Garry at the time, and he was a tank gunner and helped liberate Holland during the Second World War. But prior to the D-Day landing, he trained in Aldershot, England. And there's kind of a unique, well, they're all unique. They're all unique? No, that's not right. it's a fascinating chapter nonetheless. Takes place like 1880 in Aldershot, England. And this is not just, someone seeing a flashing light in the sky. This is like a close encounter with an actual being or beings.
Mhm.
Tell me about it.
I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, yeah, it's a huge book, and I'm asking you to pull up this. These were a being that was witnessed in tight-fitting clothes. Remember, this is 1880.
Yeah.
Tight-fitting clothes, a shining helmet, and it soared over the head of two sentries, and they fired on it without any result.
The blue light.
Yeah, but this is it's an entity. It doesn't appear as if it was flying inside a ship. It was a being that was like it had a jetpack or something. I don't know. But what's interesting is the language that the witnesses described it. I mean, again, we're talking about 1880. A shiny helmet, tight-fitting clothes. Anyway, it's obviously it stunned the guards, and you're right. It was described as a blue fire, but this was an entity that flew over their heads. 1880, absolutely amazing. These are cases I've never heard before, and you and your late husband did a remarkable job, and Ken Goudsward, in bringing these to our attention. Do you have a famous or a favorite pre-Roswell sighting?
Oh gosh, I have so many of them. I think one of the ones that fascinated me was that actually Kenneth Arnold was not the first to call them flying saucers. In 1180 in Japan, there was a sighting, and it was described as flying earthware vessel. It was a flying earthware vessel. So 700 years before Kenneth Arnold said that, there it is. And I know that they've been around for a long time. And I had no idea that, you want to take it all the way back, you can take it back 45,000 years. They've been around, they've been around long enough for us to record them, but probably a lot longer before then. So that, and they are described as like us, as far as, head, arms, legs, that stuff, but not exactly. In some cases, though, the people that saw them thought that they were humanistic. Some did describe the fact that they had on skin tight uniforms and large eyes, and they described what one would probably call a gray. But people back then, they would describe things from their frame of reference. So depending on how far back you go, Da Vinci painted a UFO and an alien into at least one of his paintings. So that I think what hit me was that you can take it so far back that there are things out there that do describe these occurrences. So that, and a lot of times though they have explosions like the Tuskegee, the one in Russia.
Yes.
I want to say Tuskegee, and that's not the right one, but it's not the right word. I don't think it was in Russia. One exploded and wiped out trees and
Oh, Tunguska. Yes, Tunguska in
thank you.
Siberia. Yes, 1908.
And it just it created such a it was not a meteor strike because there was no cavity or anything, and they kind of thought that perhaps that it had been a nuclear explosion of some sort, or a ship that exploded, and just
right. Someone attributed to Nikola Tesla's death ray.
I'm sure he would love to be around now.
I'll bet. Well, as you say, we have sightings going back all the way prior to even biblical times into the distant past. And it only took the New York Times 45,000 years, 2017. They finally started to take it seriously in December of 2017. Wow. Fantastic work, Barbara, and also to Ken Goudsward for putting this together. Before Roswell, the Secret History of UFOs. It's such a wonderful documentation of all of these remarkable cases, many of which I'm not familiar with, and I know people are going to enjoy it. How do we get a copy?
It's on Amazon. I do believe that's the only place where I know of. I think Ken is the publisher, so you may be able to get it through him. But I would suggest most probably Amazon is the best place to go.
All right, and again, NightLight Radio. You can catch it on YouTube. Thank you so much, Barbara. Great to speak with you.
Thank you.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.